All right, welcome everybody to the Somewhat Podcast, men. Today we have our first official guest, Diffusion, on the mic. How are you, Diffusion? My name's Alex. Today we're going to be talking about inflation and the economy. Now, I know, folks, that we try to hide our identities. We all got jobs and stuff like that. But you need to trust us when we tell you that when we bring a guest on, that they have experience in the field that they're going to be talking about. So Diffusion here has over 20 years of experience in the financial industry on a senior level. So just some background. Risque?
Yes, and make sure you watch this entire video because at the end, Diffusion is going to give you 3 stocks that are going to send your portfolio to the moon. But you have to watch the entire video in order to get to that point.
And by the way, this is not recommendation for anybody's investment, right? So
yeah, just a clarification. This is Diffusion's own personal opinions. This is not a recommendation for any type of financial or investment strategy. And also, if he actually does work for a financial company and maybe he's a goat farmer somewhere, but if he does actually work for an investment company or a financial company somewhere, this is not their opinion.
Hey, to the listeners, this is just a necessary disclaimer. If you put your money in those stocks, you'll get rich.
Oh my God. Risque, kick it off, man.
Yeah, well, Diffusion, let's just start with the basics. Like, why don't explain to the listeners what exactly is inflation? Why is it important?
Ready for being diffused right now. Come on.
Risque.
So, listen, man. I think it's a very topical conversation because we hear about this, inflation all the time. We hear about inflation, and I think let me tell you, like, inflation actually, although we're seeing like kind of like more aggressive version of inflation because every time you go to a gas pump, you're like, holy shit, it went from like $30 to fill up my gas tank to $60 to $80 now to close to $100 to fill up the gas tank. That's kind of like the first impact that you see of inflation. But I'll tell you one thing about inflation in general, the way the government looks at inflation, actually energy, when they look at their core inflation, they don't consider that as their overall mix of inflation when they look at inflation. So this is very interesting. So the pain that we feel on a monthly basis, they don't put that in there kind of like the measurement, if you will, on day-to-day inflation. So that's one thing.
Wow.
Well, what do they look at then exactly?
They look at things that are kind of like long-term. So they take out the volatile things like energy. They can change from month to month. But you know what? Guess what? A lot of Americans, the reality is that they live month to month. So so this is like they don't consider this, and and an interesting thing is that inflation. Then you had transitory inflation that we, last year this word was being thrown around. Like they were saying, like, hey, don't worry, we got this little spike in, prices, but it's all gonna go away in like 2 to 3 months or whatnot. And we're gonna go back to our normal ways. And listen, prime example, inflation. My lease is coming due for my car in August.
You're screwed.
Car, double the price. What do I do here? What do I do? Inflation 101. But see, that's inflation. At least I'm getting the same car, twice the price. Yeah. But I think what a lot of Americans, and not just Americans, I think a lot of people in the world, what they're feeling is shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation?
So now you go to the store, you're getting a higher price for the same item, but lower the quantity on top of it all.
Wow.
I was shocked. I like Mexican food. Okay, like Mexican food, not Mexican.
Yeah.
I like Mexican food, man. Who doesn't like Mexican food, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason why I like Mexican food is because when I get to a Mexican restaurant, they give me sauce and chips.
Yeah.
I like that. I like it. I went to a Mexican restaurant, paid $25 for a burrito.
No salsa and chips.
Wait, $25 for a burrito?
Let me tell you, this is not like a Michelin rated burrito. It's not.
$25 for a burrito?
And no salsa and chips. I almost got up and I wanted to walk away.
Inflation is really bad when Little Caesar's pizza is like $6.50 now.
Damn, son.
If Little Caesar's pizza goes to $10, like I think the world economy is imploding. I think it's over for us. That's my marker.
Absolutely. So what I wanted to say about inflation is that inflation started kind of rolling up on us, a couple of years ago. Because if you think about, when we talk about interest rates, right? So interest rates essentially promote or stop the inflation.
Right.
So over the last decade or so, right? Really, the way I like to tell people to, kind of like help them understand, because United States in general is a culture that can relate to medication and drugs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the world economy has been induced with a lot of drugs, stimulating it. Every time there was a problem, we'll pour more money into it, into it.
More stimulation.
All this stimulation, they're like, just adrenaline shots, life support. So ultimately what that has created, unlike 2008, is really a lot of bubbles. So in 2008, we had one big bubble, which was housing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we got a lot of different bubbles, from school debt, right? From corporate debt.
Cryptocurrency.
Oh, we've seen those bubbles bust, right? You see what happened with Bitcoin. You see what's happening in these tech stocks. I mean, these tech stocks, goodness gracious, the only thing that people cared about was just the name, the brand. They didn't care about the price whatsoever. Mm-hmm. They're like, I just gotta get in with Bitcoin. I gotta get in with Tesla. I don't care what the price is. I don't care what the financials are. I don't care what the fundamentals of the companies are. I just gotta go follow the trend, because there was a lot of what they call helicopter money being thrown around. And another
and also a lot of FOMO, fear of missing out. I think FOMO was a big, psychological factor in that too.
So what you're saying is that the difference between 2008 and now is that in 2008 they had a big real estate bubble, and now we have a bunch of mid-sized or little bubbles,
or some even larger bubbles out there, right? So you see Biden right now trying to forgive some of the school debt, right? Because that's kind of spiraling out of control as well, right? But the reality is this, that, there's just too many holes that you're trying to, think of a boat with too many holes. You have two hands. You plug this hole somewhere else, it's leaking. You plug that hole somewhere else, it's leaking. So there's a lot of moving parts to the situation. And the reality is this, because we were so stimulating over the last decade or so, is that we got into that transitory inflation, and the Fed was behind the ball. They should have put a break on this inflation way long ago. The reality is that if you had your money, when you were running 0% interest rates, right? When we had 0% interest rates, federal funds rate 0 to 25 basis points, the reality is that you still had what we call negative real interest rates. Okay? So when you add inflation that we had over the last couple of, last 5-6 years, we still had inflation 2 to 3%. With zero interest rates, that means you were behind the ball about 3%. So if you left money in the bank and not investing it, right, then what you were doing, you were just losing about 3% a year, because there was still a little bit of inflation there. So the real interest rates were negative, right? And ultimately what the Fed is trying to do is, in a hot environment when things are heating up, is try to get to what they call a market neutral rate. So it's not stimulating, but it's not putting brakes on the economy. And the biggest fear right now that we're having is that because they lost their control, that soft landing, or putting the slowdown on the economy, they're saying it's pretty much the odds are just, every day that we go through this are lower and lower.
And now, just to clarify for the listeners, when Diffusion is talking about the drugs that were being fed, he's talking about the low interest rates, correct, Diffusion?
Yeah. Not the amphetamines.
I just wanted to clarify to everyone that
let me ask you a real just quick question. So when the banks were bailed out, the last explosion we had, and the feds let them create money out of thin air again, even threw money at them to get through their stupidity. So So that car wreck is now going to happen. Basically.
So yeah, actually, you're bringing up a very, very good point. So
Bailouts.
what people assumed after that is that government will not let things go into a direction where it will create some kind of a liquidity crunch where you won't be able to get your money out of the bank. So people always assume the government will be there to stop or infuse any kind of a liquidity, so therefore you will never have an issue. So just real quickly, I want to kind of like go into international just real quickly here, because I want to make a huge kind of like a comparison of how we dealt with an issue versus some other countries. But just in that, I was just like, if you take a look at some of the estimates, when you look at some of the analysts, in order for the inflation to cool down, right now, if you look at the unemployment rate, we're running all-time low, right? Like from 1980s or so. In order for this inflation to start cooling down, we will have to have unemployment rate north of 5%. So, much higher than what it is right now for the next couple of years in order for this inflation to cool down.
Wow.
Okay? In United States.
And that's because
let's go overseas. Let's go overseas. So we talked about this bailouts that we had in the United States.
Diffusion,
right?
hold on.
Yeah.
So the reason why we need more unemployment is because there'll be less buying power.
Right. So the interesting part, just so you know, like when it comes to money transferring and just wealth, the lower income bracket that a person is, the more stimulating it is to the economy. Because rich people, whether they lose $100,000 or $1 million, they're pretty well there. Annual spending is put in place to begin with, right? So whether they get $10,000 extra or $5,000 extra, it won't really dampen that much of their consumption, right? But people who are in the lower bracket, when they get $5,000, $10,000, they put that money to work right away, and that feeds directly into the economy. Rich people, if they get $5,000, whatever, it will not go directly to the economy. Again, the lower bracket, as soon as they get their money, they put it to work. Walmart, profit, go up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, so we talked about this bailout concept. I think it's extremely important because United States, like I said, right now, what we're trying to do, and Europe, is get rid of all these liquidity provisions that we put in place. Take out that, this like not just low interest rates, but also the purchases that the Fed has been not buying. They've been purchasing a lot of fixed income, okay, in order to control the yield, not just in the short term. The Fed only controls, just when they set the interest rates, they only control what they call the front end of the curve. Now,
diffusion. Could you explain that in layman's terms? Because I think that's an important concept for people to understand.
Yep. So when the government talks about raising and lowering interest rates, they only talk about very short-term interest rates. They don't control 30-year. They don't control 10 years. Those interest rates are forward-looking. So ultimately, if you think that the economy will be doing well, that means that the Fed will be increasing interest rates over the next 10 years. So therefore, the interest rate curve will be steepening upwards if you think that the economy will do well.
Okay.
If you think that the economy won't be doing well over the, let's say, next 10 years, then you think that the federal funds in 10 years from now will be cut as they were until recently, that means that the 10-year will start dropping down.
Okay.
You have no faith. Now, there's two components to it. There's like that, expectation what the interest rates are, but also inflation as well. So 3% interest rate is essentially a market neutral rate. And that means that, after the inflation, you're really earning zero. So they're saying that over the next 10 years, what the market is expecting is that the government will be neither stimulating nor contracting. That means the economy will be just kind of muddling along.
But right now, if I have the figures correct, the inflation rate in the United States is like 8.4 or 8 point something percent.
Exactly. So we're way behind the ball. So as you said here, we've just increased the interest rates by 75 basis points, but that is way below the 8% that we kind of like where the market is at right now.
I see.
So ultimately, the short-term interest rates where they are and where the inflation is, there's a lot of dislocation. And what they're hoping is that by raising a little bit more, by taking some money out of the market, then eventually what that will do is kind of like, hamper the inflation. Now, I mentioned this QE, the stimulation that the government is buying and selling bonds in the market.
Yes,
So
yes.
what that does is it controls that long-term interest rate curve. So I talked about the 10-year, 15-year, and 30-year. So what they do is they go in the market, they're like, you know what? This 30-year bond is too expensive. It shouldn't be 3%. It should be 2.5%. So they go out there and they'll buy a whole bunch of it in order to decrease the interest rates.
So what type of bonds do they buy exactly? I was always like,
so there's
they just
depends on the situation. So usually they always prefer to buy like federal, like the government issue, like treasuries. Okay, so
treasuries.
Okay, but also they'll go into non-agency and agency-backed mortgages. So when we had housing crisis, in order to stimulate, so there's various different types of fixed income instruments. So you have what the government issues, and then you have our mortgages. So these banks, all these mortgages, there's something called conforming and non-conforming mortgages. I don't want to get too crazy with this stuff, but ultimately, these mortgages, they're pegged. The 30-year mortgages, they're pegged to a 10-year interest rate curve.
Okay.
Not what we're seeing right now, but the 10-year curve is more important. The 10-year interest.
The mortgages.
Yeah.
You were talking about the U.S. and Europe versus another world
China
economy. Like you didn't really get into that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So we talked about the bailouts.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal. The government saved companies.
Right.
During financial crisis. Now let's go forward to last year. Do you guys know what the most levered or like the most levered company there was? They kind of like
most leveraged?
Belly up. It was in China. It's called Evergrande.
Yeah.
Or Evergrande.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Evergrande. Okay.
Yep. So there was a big issue going on in China with this real estate company. Real estate is a huge portion of overall China, but the government stepped in and said, "Listen, real estate is not about speculation; it's for people to live in." So you developers out there, they're speculating, trying to make that money. They're like, think twice. Housing is made for living, not for speculation. Okay? So what happened was that, because of that, the signal came and they were like, oh crap, we got to kind of like refigure out things. They were hyper levered. So they ran into trouble, right? The economy is getting soft in China, right? The interest rates were a little bit higher, so the people they weren't as buying as much. So the company started going belly up. They were not able to pay some of their debt. Now that has a spiraling effect, right? So think about Lehman Brothers. Okay?
Right, yeah.
Kind of like the Lehman Brothers, So this has a huge fallout because now all the other real estate companies, they're like, oh my God, if this company went down and this is the biggest one, what's going to happen to the other ones, right? So all this debt that was trading at, let's say, 100 cents on the dollar goes down and gets traded 30 cents on the dollar.
Yeah,
because if you were to deliver this company, at best you get 30 cents on the dollar.
China took the air out of that, balloon before it even blew up completely. I'm telling you.
But I was going to ask, diffusion. Do you agree that what are your thoughts? Should the bailouts have happened or not?
No.
So listen, do you want to put a lipstick on a pig?
So you think they should have let the companies crash and burn?
That is the best way to picture that. Seriously.
Yeah. So you know what China said? When Evergrande went belly up? The West, like all the investors, they're like, oh my God, there's like a lot of Wall Street people invested in this, including, some of the people that I work with, and they're like, oh my God, there's a lot of pressure. Government, save this. There's going to be serious, situation here. There's going to be a liquidity crisis. There's going to be problems. China went to the CEO, the government. They were like, listen, Mr. CEO, how much did you make last year? Okay, great.
Oh.
Pay up those bonds.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
You're saying the U.S. should have done a similar approach to what China did.
Again, there is different ways of kind of thinking about this. In U.S., there's a big issue with the United States is that we are big believers of something called kicking the can down the road. Social security, healthcare, all these different things. We say, you know what? Let the other president deal with it. The thing with China the Chinese government, there's no kicking down the road. This guy's gonna be there till he dies.
Yeah, essentially.
So we're gonna deal with it now.
So he was like, I'm gonna deal with this right now because they were the first country in COVID, first country out of COVID. They had the best GDP coming out of COVID. So they were like, you know what? We're gonna deal with all this stuff right now.
Yeah.
And they're doing pretty good right now, correct? Like compared to other countries.
So this is what I say: they're not doing so good in a sense that because they have a lot of inflicted wounds. So because they went to Evergrande, they're like, you know what? We're not going to bail you out. You got to deal with your own crap.
Right.
You come up with your own money. You figure it out. You know, you do this by yourself. And then they went. You know, like again, they went to other sectors. They said, like, you know what? In this sector, in this tech sector, people work way too much. We want our society to be healthy mentally. So they limit amount of hours that people can work in the tech sector. So they went, you know, they just started kind of like making this list. Pharmaceutical companies, they were like, you know what? These companies are taking advantage of sick people. So generic drugs, as an example, like antibiotics and all these things that we pay a lot of money for in the United States, they said, no. The hospitals cannot purchase these things individually for pharma companies. The government is the main buyer, and it gives it to all the hospitals. So they have the economies of scale. So they were able to slash the prices of generic drugs by 70%. So there's a lot of things that they've done. So they cut it. Now, again, to us, to investors, for me, who invested in China, this is painful. But does this create a situation for the economy to be delivered, to be healthy, to be kind of coming out as a clean slate? There is yes, right? So the other thing that I want to highlight is this thing called, before it was all about the countries were coming together, and we talk about this globalization, right? You heard about globalization. Now it's deglobalization, decoupling happening.
Oh, really?
Decoupling, absolutely. If you look at the best performing chip companies, manufacturers, over the last quarter or so, guess where they're from?
Greece.
Chip companies?
Chinese chip. No, I'm sorry, the chip
computer
microchips.
Microchips and everything. Yeah.
Computer chips.
Computer chips. Sorry, computer chips. Like
Taiwanese
semiconductors.
Yeah.
So TSM, Taiwan Semiconductors,
Taiwan
the largest
Semiconductors.
ones.
Yeah.
But if you look at the biggest growth, like top 5 companies that had the biggest growth are all from China because United States banned semiconductor sales and technology to be sold to China, especially to Huawei, because remember, they're spying on U.S. consumers and things of that sort. So we are not able to sell stuff. Now there's a huge growth in that whole area. And just so you know, China in general, people think about, when you think about China, they're like, oh my God, it's the second largest economy with the second largest stock market. And I think that in the United States, we have to take them seriously because, again, they're importing oil that's 30% cheaper than what we are buying in the market.
From Russia. They're getting from Russia, yeah.
They're buying it from Russia. The biggest exporter is no longer Saudi Arabia. It's Russia to China. When you think about just in general about China, we have to take this country very seriously because, we're here raising interest rates. They're decreasing interest rates. They're in a totally different economic cycle. It's what I'm talking about, decoupling. If you think about, the reason, one of the biggest self-inflicting wounds besides this regulation that we've seen is COVID. They have the zero COVID policy. And it's quite simple. Because they don't have Western medicine, if they let COVID run loose, they will have their hospital system will get overwhelmed very easily. But guess what? But at the same token, they're saying, you know what? We don't want the Western medicine.
Yeah.
They want to develop their own RNA vaccine. And even though they're shutting down their economy, right? Although they're going through some serious restrictions, they're saying, you know what? We're still not going to import. So when we talk about these stocks, you're saying where to invest, especially in particular countries. If there's something that I would recommend to you guys, innovative drugs in China, like Jiangsu Henry, is a company that you should be really thinking about.
Now let's. I think it's a good segue. So, the person who's watching and listening to this, the common person, right, who's sort of like hearing about inflation, this, that, what should the common person, what should they pay attention to? What should they do in terms of preparing for the future? Do you have any advice, and tips for that?
Before we get in, hold on, before we get into that.
Yeah.
So inflation's happening now on a day-to-day basis. The cost of goods have gone up, and you also pointed out that we're getting less things for the same amount of money that we're spending. So a half a gallon of milk instead of a gallon of milk for $5, right? Just as an example. And all these things are starting to kick in. When do you see in the next 5 years, do you see inflation getting worse or better?
Yeah, I mean, listen. So it all depends how the Fed will react over the next couple of meetings, right?
Yeah.
So before it was, their trajectory it was about 25 basis points increase, right? That's what they were saying. Then it was 50 basis points. Now they're up to 75 basis points, and they did this one bump, right? What will they do in the next meeting? Are they going to increase interest rates again by 75 basis points or not?
How often does they meet? They meet every month, or how often does they meet?
Yes, exactly.
So people should look out for Fed meetings every month. By the way, that's definitely
absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So the question is how powerful or how stringent they will be. So if the market says, and they see they're like, oh, these guys are serious. They're increasing about 75 basis points every time. They're really serious about tackling this inflation. Then you know what? We may see this inflation start dying out over, in September or starting Q3, third quarter. But
oh wow,
not
early.
What we said last year. Let me tell you, economists and weather people are the only two people. They always kind of get these calls wrong and still have a job.
Oh man,
that's true. Economy is complicated.
So you're saying it depends on the Fed. So let's say they don't get inflation under control. When do you think we'll start? Will we hit a recession, and when do you think we'll start hitting the recession? If you can even talk about that, you might not be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, everybody right now, if you look at the way the market is pricing everything in, I mean, right now, the likelihood of recession and happening towards the end of the year it's increasing every single day as we talk. So
you think over 50%? You think, or under 50?
It's still not at 50%, but just if you go a couple of months back, it was something like 10-15%. Now it's increased up to 30%, right? Okay. And I mean, these are significant numbers. 1 in 3 chance of hitting a recession. Yeah. But remember, we got a lot of things happening globally, right? Yeah. We got this thing happening in Russia, right?
Yeah.
The wheat supplies, Ukraine, although it's not a large economy, Russia in general is not an overall large economy. If you look at the overall index, there's this index that they call ACWI, All Country World Index, which is very famous by MSCI. It was only Russia Ukraine was not even part of that index altogether because it's so small. But Russia in itself was something like 3%. So it's not a major economic power compared to, let's say, United States and China. But the amount of fertilizer, the amount of food and grains and and commodities that these countries they control, this is where again we talk about this low income, how they directly translate to directly injecting money into economy. Well, same thing happens with these third world countries as well. So now all of a sudden you have all these countries that were depending on on this wheat to come into their country, right? And then now it's questionable. So this can further enhance the inflationary problems, right? The situation that's happening in China with the COVID lockdowns and these tankers not being able to leave China because of this lockdown, they can further create inflationary problems, Just again, bring
that means that you're saying that's what the global supply chain, right? That's what's affecting a global supply chain, which is contributing to the inflation as well, because because supply is because it's basically demand and supply, right? So if the supply is reduced, demand is high, inflation goes up. Correct?
Well, it's kind of. You want to have is supply and demand intersect. Right now, the demand is so much higher than what the supply is, and therefore
inflation.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
But there's a lot of question marks because even with the suppliers, right? So what analysts, what they're trying to decipher right now is that, think about, like, I'm talking about a car right now.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they're panicking. What do I do with the car? So they'll go to, let's kind of get bougie here. They'll go to Mercedes dealership. They'll go to BMW dealership. They'll go to Audi dealership, right? Maybe even Maserati, right? And they'll say, okay, who can get me a car? Like, who can get me a car? Beamer, Benz, and Bentley. Beamer, Benz, and Bentley. All right, so they're like, who can get me a car? So you put a deposit down, $200, $300 to 4 different dealerships, right? And they'll say, this guy, like, I'll bring it to you in 3 weeks. I'll bring it to you in 4 weeks. This, that. And you don't believe anybody because you're like, oh my God, nobody can bring my car, right?
Right.
So you quadruple order for an item that you're going to purchase only one time. You're not going to get 4 cars. You're going to lose a deposit. Yeah. Now, we're talking about consumers, you and I, okay?
Right.
Now, let's bring it up to the corporate level. So I am Ford. I am Chrysler. I am all of these companies. I need the semiconductors. I need these different parts for my car. I'm going to go to my suppliers, and I'm going to like, dude, I need this. So every single supplier, and every single supplier is going to put the order in. And then the manufacturers, they're all making it. Okay? Now, they're going to bring it in. So ultimately, what the biggest issue is, although we're going into high inflation right now, if everybody's triple ordering, quadruple ordering because they can't get their parts, and when that comes in and they cancel the rest of the orders, and all of a sudden I am Walmart, I am Costco, I'm all of these other companies, and I have this huge inventory, what happens then?
Prices drop.
Prices drop.
Liquidation.
Yeah. But but if there's global supply chain issues, and I know they're probably complicated, and we don't have to go into details, but if the global supply chain issues get resolved, then inflation should definitely start to get under better control. No?
Yes.
It's hard to say.
Yeah, ideally, yes.
Ideally,
this should get better. But what is better? You know, like if they're backordered 12 months. You know, so you're talking about, like, even in the best case. Listen, to make chips, to make these semiconductors, it's not like I can just say, you know what, I'm just going to do this. I got it right now, today, 2022. I got to invest billions of dollars. Okay? I got to invest billions of dollars to build 5 different manufacturing plants in order to meet the supply. It's going to take me over a year to do this. It's going to increase my capacity by 30%.
Mm-hmm.
Year from now comes, everything has been triple ordered. I just built this huge facility in the United States. What do? I invested billions of dollars. Is that beneficial for the stock market?
Right.
And for the profits of this company if you have to liquidate your inventory?
No, absolutely not.
It's not. So you can go from this super inflationary environment to this super deflationary environment very quickly.
Is that called?
Which would lead to unemployment.
Is that what they mean by, what's that called? The stagflation? Is that what that is?
Stagflation is kind of like the worst case scenario.
Okay.
Where you have stubborn inflation, where you can't control it, the Fed can't control it.
Right.
But you're increasing the interest rate so much that you're killing the growth, but the inflation stays persistent. So you're talking about some geopolitical issues going on, like, for example, like, you know, like the gas, like, you know, the oil supply, you know, like, it's constantly at a high price. It just never drops because of the geopolitical prices. Situation, not enough investments. People are scared. They're like, oh my God, like, you know, there's not much economy growth going on. Why am I going to build another oil rig? I might as well smoke this at $120.
Mm-hmm. So if we look at the pathways that we can head into, so the worst case scenario would be stagflation. And the best case scenario is that the airplane makes a nice soft landing, essentially. I think
I want to get into more about the inflation and then the deflation, the rapid deflation. If that happens, is that going to lead to unemployment?
So deflation is very tricky. Japan was in deflation. The problem with deflation is that the Fed doesn't have really too many tools to fight deflation.
No, they can't. They just throw more money at it.
Yeah, they throw money, but you can't, like, you know, for example, like how negative, like, for example, in Europe we had negative interest rates, right?
Yeah.
You know, Japan. Yeah, so essentially what's happening is that the people are so scared about economy that they're willing to lose money. They're like, yo, listen, I'll give you $100, just give me $98 back.
Risky, were you
Wow.
gonna make a stripper reference,
No, I was
Risky?
going to make a bad joke, but I think I should. I was going to say, like, if anybody from the Fed is listening and they want to throw money, I'm more than happy to be, be the recipient.
Be the stripper. Discord.
No.
Yeah, and we'll have all those piggies that put lipstick on, the corporate piggies run around, do a little circle dance.
Yeah.
Dude, Said is all about the lipstick on the pig.
Yeah.
The problem we're fighting here is the corporate greed. Those guys are like running, just crazy over here. Nobody puts a lid on that, and that's the main problem.
Well, I mean, listen, you're probably watching this. The reality is also like the CEOs, they're just it's like constantly this trend has been going that the richer are getting richer. So even the CEOs, like
it's
the
everywhere,
pots
not just here.
Yeah, it's everywhere, of course. So like like when you look at the CEOs and stuff like that, like the amount of money that they're taking compared to like the person who are also working in the company, that gap is just getting bigger and bigger. It's almost like a one-man show here.
But I don't see that changing though anytime soon. Do you see that changing?
This is my analyst.
Oh yes.
My analyst.
Hello.
You took the notes? Yeah, it's in my.
Hi.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
So if we hit a inflation and then to rapid deflation and see a bunch of unemployment. So now okay, let's level set. Let's say there's inflation. The word on the street right now is that there's going to be a recession and continued inflation in the first quarter of 2023, and that some parts of the country it'll happen in the first quarter of 2023, and then in some parts of the country it's going to happen in the first quarter of 2024. So if that is true, if that assessment is true, what can the common man do to prepare for that?
Right.
Listen, man, it's quite simple. You get a couple of goats.
I almost just said head for the mountains.
For the mountains.
Yeah, of course. Where are you gonna herd goats, man? Clean air, free water.
Yeah, bro.
Get a couple of sheep too, man. Get some wool, keep yourself warm,
Damn, son.
Saint, don't go to the wilderness. Saint, don't go to the wilderness.
Let me tell you, he's not the only analyst. He's not the only analyst I've heard him say that. I've been hearing a lot of the Pakistani analysts. They said the same thing. They said, you know what? Get some cattle, get some goats, get some chickens, and you're good.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, listen,
Imagine when an analyst tells you that.
Listen, in inflation, the thing that has kind of like the highest correlation to inflation is really what we call hard assets. Okay, so we talk about commodities, like oil, gold, silver, all these other things, right? Now, iron, on the other hand, like, it's been dropping like crazy because of what's been happening globally, just like people are saying there's less demand for steel and stuff like that. But the reality is that, commodities tend to protect the best hard assets. They tend to protect best against inflation. So,
What about gold? Like, a lot of people talk about, like, using gold as a hedge for inflation. No?
Yeah, I mean, gold is. Listen, it's not the gold standard, if you will, right? Gold is a tool, right? But I think a diversified basket of commodities will go a long way. They have an extremely high beta. In other words, for example, like commodities, for 1% of inflation, typically jumps 7%. So 1% upside, you get 7% return on commodities.
Like, buying ammunition. Pack up on ammunition, buy a crap ton of bullets.
Listen. I mean, it's a very good statement you make because defense companies in general, you hear like with everything that's happening, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's raising their defense budgets. So the reality is that a lot of asset managers, they can't purchase these defense companies because of the weapons that they make. It's illegal for them. They're not allowed by prospectus to buy them. The companies that I work in, for example, we don't have an ability, especially if these defense companies make cluster bombs and all this stuff. A lot of asset managers cannot invest in them. Okay, but you see the governments are investing in them, right? So there's going to be money to be made there, right? So there's another thing. Ding, ding. Second stock, defense stock,
Defense stocks.
Martin, you're looking good, baby.
But hold on. So like, we're looking at purchasing silver, gold, livestock, maybe planting trees that can produce wood, purchase land if you have the availability to. Those are all things that people can do if they have money to do it. What if you don't? What if you don't have money to do that kind of stuff? What's a very simple common man thing that people can do?
The best thing would be get an ETF that kind of buys into a diversified basket of commodities. Diversified. Listen, I'm talking about diversified. For anybody to predict which particular, whether it's going to be coca beans, whether it's going to be, Brent crude oil or this, it's very difficult to predict of one single commodity where it's going to go,
Right.
But I think if you buy a diversified basket, you're still going to do quite well. The other thing that you can do, the thing is that my biggest fear is it's not for you and I. We're still working, we can still get a job, we can still save money. The problem is retired people. It's really retired people. So people who, listen, if you're 65 and you lose 30% of your assets,
yeah,
just because the market, and then you get hit with the inflation on top of it,
yeah, you're
how do you
screwed.
recover from that?
Can't.
You got your healthcare costs are coming every year. They're higher and higher. So, listen, what I always recommend, is, for people to always consider inflation-protected bonds as well. They call those TIPS.
Tips. Yeah.
So now, what about let's say a common man or woman who has a 9 to 5, and most of their income's going to pay their bills, and they have some discretionary income afterwards. Should they focus off on paying debt right now? Should they not? Should they pay minimum? Should they pay all of it? Should they pay as aggressive as possible in the debt paying? Now, what about purchasing of goods? Should they buy a lot of, let's say, non-perishable items because the price of things are going up? Should they buy, instead of 2 gallons of soap, laundry soap, should they buy 5? Those kind of things.
Oh man, these are great points. These are all great points.
Question. Very good question.
Great points. So listen, technically speaking, when I was about 10, 15 years ago, I used to work for an asset bank, like a really good fixed income shop, and they were saying like, how will the United States get out of this such a huge deficit that they're running, right? Because they're constantly giving out these bonds. Well, there's 2 ways of getting out, or 3 ways, I should say. First one is repaying your debt. You know that we ain't going to repay no debt, right?
Right.
We're getting more debt, right? Second one is for U.S. to default on its debt. If they do that, the world is going to collapse. Or the third one is you just make your debt shrink through inflation.
Yeah.
Listen, and we were saying this, I'm not kidding you, 15 years ago, they're like, the only way for the U.S. to get out of this humongous debt that they've created, the government has created, is by making that debt be worth less. And how do you do that? Through inflation. Because now your $100 is worth $80 or $50 or $30 or whatever the case may be. So what I'm saying to you is that unless you have a floating interest rate, which some people do, right? But if you have a fixed interest rate right now, does it make sense for you to pay off all that debt where the inflation is 8% and your interest rate is at 3%? Absolutely not. So that debt, you want to pay as minimal as possible. Okay? Now your credit cards, they're adjusted, right? Because of the interest rate and inflation. They get adjusted. The interest rate gets adjusted, right? So that you may want to reconsider. But fixed income interest rate, that you have on your housing or your school loans, whatever the case that may be, for that stuff, take your time. Now, what you're saying also in regards to if you want to buy non-perishable items like soap and stuff like that, that's a very complicated question, because you buying it right now will create more demand and enhance kind of like the pricing is almost like the toilet paper situation that we had. Right? Yeah. So I mean, ideally, yes, it makes sense for you to have that stuff because you know the prices are gonna go up, right? It makes sense, right? But are you creating even more inflation if you do that? The answer is yes.
Okay.
Well, we just created more inflation. They're gonna go out and buy it now. Shit.
Oh yeah. So in a nutshell, fixed interest rate, slow the payments down. High interest rates, speed the payments up.
Floating interest rates.
Floating interest rates, speed the payment up.
Take your time on the fixed ones.
Take your time on the fixed ones, and for purchasing a lot of non-perishable items, do it responsibly.
Yeah.
And buy yourself a goat.
Buy yourself a goat, man, with milk.
And head to the mountains.
Yeah, pick a mountain. There's
true,
plenty of
man.
mountains in the United States. Go pick one right now.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Florida doesn't have that many mountains.
Yeah, Florida has no mountains.
Yeah, we just gotta head north and we'll find them.
Yeah, you gotta head north, man.
Colorado. I'm gonna go to Colorado. Colorado's beautiful.
Hey, I'll be in Virginia this summer, so I'm gonna pick my mountain up there.
Yeah, man. Hey, listen. When Virginia gets some good coal out there, in the Colorado, you get some, some silver and some gold.
So, but I think to the people watching, like, I think the other message is that they shouldn't panic, right? I mean, panicking is not going to help anything.
Panicking doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
No, listen. Like you hear all these people like who buy like 7 tires for their car and this and that.
Right.
Like, the reality is this. I know we talk about like the issues the United States has, and putting band-aids and lipsticks and kicking the can down the road. But you have to remember, United States is still the largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, it is still the most innovative economy in the world, right? It has the best infrastructure. The roads connecting the country. We're at the end of the day, we don't have to import any energy. We're self-sufficient. More so than China is, right, and any other country out there, right? So there's a lot of tools still that the government has. Because remember, everything that we're talking about is only one half, which is the Fed, right? The Federal Reserve.
Right.
You still got the government, right? You got this, monetary and fiscal policy. The government still, like Biden is saying right now, they can come in, they can forgive all the debt, all the loans, and whatever. They can do whatever they want, right? So there's a lot of tools that they can implement to give us more drugs,
You should forget all debt, period.
Hey, the other thing, diffusion, as you were talking, I think one important thing to also point out is the other thing that the United States, I think one of the biggest things it has going for it is the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Correct?
Still is.
And I think as long as the dollar is the world's reserve, for now, I'm saying, it puts the United States in a very strong position, I think, globally.
All right, awesome. So guys, let's wrap this up. Let's get into our final thoughts. Diffusion, final thoughts.
Diffusion, final thoughts. Okay, so listen, I think every opportunity has benefits and drawbacks, right? So with every opportunity in every market environment, there's always investment opportunities, right? This year we've seen commodities have done extremely well, right? My suggestion is that keep an eye out on these companies, keep an eye out on Microsoft, keep an eye out on Apple's and Google's, all these companies that they're good staples and they're not going to go away, but they've corrected 30-40% because they've already priced in, recession. I'll keep an eye on things like that, right? So, because, you really think that, Apple is going to go away?
No.
Company has more money than most countries out there, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
It does.
Absolutely.
Right. So there's a lot of quality companies out there that have a lot of cash out there. So keep an eye on that. It's not the end of the world, right? Like they're saying, like even like kind of like you have to remember, like even if things kind of like hit the fan, like a lot of these companies are still not going out of business. Some of these companies have been around. I know we talk about that. It's like Lehman Brothers too. They've been around for over 100 years until they went out of business, right? But that was like you're talking about one company here, right? So So I think that there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of volatility out there. But I think if you're a disciplined investor, this is where you're going to start taking advantage of some of these trends. If you right, because listen, on the streets in Queens, what they say is that scared money don't make no money. You know,
right, son.
So
that's a song, isn't it? Scared money don't make no money.
Rich, that's a song. Everybody will be rich. It was easy. Everybody will be rich. It's like when people start running, you got to start coming in. It's kind of contrarian your way. So you got to find these high quality companies and really try to capitalize from that. So I think keep an eye on that. Don't forget about the second largest economy out there. Look, you think we have problem here? Our tech stocks are down 30-40%. In China, their tech stocks are down like 70%. So hey, if you think you're buying low, think about that for a second. Again, the bottom line is that the fundamentals and the cash that these companies are making, they're still in a very, very solid situation. We're not talking about companies that are hyper levered like Evergrande, which did go through default, right? Is going through a default. We're not talking about companies like that. We're talking about companies that are stable and here to stay. You want to take advantage of them.
Nice. Yep. Rizke?
Yeah, I mean, those are all good points, Diffusion. I think that I'm just going to say that I think people should not panic. I think psychologically, I think, you need to because if you watch the news, the media, if you watch that every day, you're probably going to have panic attacks and, start thinking the worst, essentially. So I think, if you are watching too much news, I would say just sort of take a break from that, really. And but like I said, we pointed to some things to keep an eye on, particularly how fast the interest rates go up. Be smart about how you manage your money, talking about with the floating variable rate debts, interest rates, those type of debts like student loans, mortgages. No need to go overboard with that. But if you have high credit card debt, try to pay that off as much as possible. And then finally, I'll say, don't do drugs, because as we see, the drugs that the government gave led to this problem.
So my final thoughts are that, like everybody else is saying, no need to panic.
Yeah.
But that being said, some of the lessons that we learn as children can be useful now. So everybody knows the story about the ant and the grasshopper, right? The ants were preparing for winter and the grasshopper didn't, and the grasshopper died from starvation. So now we got a couple months or a year if this does happen. What was that?
I think it was a cricket.
Whatever.
And the dead cricket got ate by the ants afterwards.
That's right, son. They ate it. So these are lessons. These are lessons that we learned as children that we can use as adults. So take the opportunity to pay off your high floating debt. Save responsibly. Purchase commodities if you have the ability to. Purchase goats if you have the ability to. And don't panic. Whatever's going to happen at the end of the day, it's going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it. Right. I see that there may be a recession in 2023 in some areas of the country, and in other areas of the country is going to come later. And that's it. Saint?
Well, to the people, you got to realize the recession or inflation is not just happening here. This one is a global pandemic. All right, it's happening everywhere. Worse, some places more. So end of the day, be a good fisherman. Know when you want to catch that fish. Look for that opportunity, and hopefully, we're gonna put less lipstick on any more piggies.
There you go.
Yeah. Oh, but hey, Saint, we can't end this podcast without me and you having some kind of a debate.
What are we gonna have a debate about?
I don't know. There's
It seems like everybody agrees with everything on there right now. There's been no. Right?
It just didn't feel natural. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I'm fine. Unless you want to talk about some piggy you want to put a lipstick on.
No, we're good, bro. We're good. Lipstick, mascara, blush, whatever it is. All right, everybody. Great podcast. Thank you, our
thank
esteemed
you,
guest. We really appreciate
Diffusion.
you.
That was
for being
excellent
on.
stuff,
Hey, man,
man.
this is a brand new direct. Just do that, bro.
Hopefully, we'll bring you back on.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Now to our sponsors. Today's podcast is brought to you by Khalas Energy Drink. One drink and Khalas. Also, stay fresh, Loda. Stay fresh, Loda. Stay fresh. Also, the Big Brown Deck Barbecue in Brantford, Florida. Come on down. The eating's good. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Peace
All
out.
right.
Peace.
Ooh, a picture's worth a thousand.